perspectives. An important role in this process was played not only by the publication of the work of the new historians, Israeli new historians, but also by some of the extensive scholarly production of iconoclastic Israeli social scientists like Ami Ayalon, Baruch Kimmerling, Menachem Klein, Shaul Mishal, Avram Sela, Gabi Peterberg, Tanya Reinhardt, Shlomo Zand, Gershon Shafir, Zev Sternhell, Edith Zertal, Yael Zerubbabel, and I've only mentioned a few of them. There are dozens of Israeli social scientists whose publication in English has had an effect of great importance. They provided unique perspectives on Israel and on Israel's occupation, and they showed that the one-dimensional perspective offered by the Israeli state and its American apologists did not reflect the range of views available within Israeli society itself. Now, much has been published by others that broadened the range of what was available to scholars and general readers, much more than I can talk about here. If there is, and I can't summarize, but if there's an absence in this range of material on Palestine available in English, it is works by Palestinian and Arab authors. The problem, in my view, is twofold. On the one hand, only a limited amount is being written by Palestinian and Arab scholars in English. To some extent, this has to do with the weakness of Arab universities, their lack of support for research, and the fact that some Arab academics can't write in English. It also has to do with the difficulties in terms of hiring, promotion, and tenure within the American university system for scholars of Arab origins. There's rank discrimination, to put it bluntly. However, finally, it is related to the tendency of many promising young Arab and Arab American students to gravitate away from the humanities and social sciences in favor of the professions and other more lucrative fields. How many mothers in this room told their sons and daughters to do engineering, medicine, business, accounting, economics? And how many of them told their children to write history and political science? None, I'm sure. Not one mother, not one father in this room. Moreover, most of the wide range of excellent work that's available in Arabic is not translated, by contrast with the extensive materials translated from Hebrew. The Institute for Palestine Studies makes a huge effort. A few American academic publishers have also done so, but much more needs to be done. One last phenomenon needs to be mentioned. This is the increasing willingness of major trade publishers in the United States who only care about money, about sales, and which are terrified of controversy, to publish works that would previously have been considered too provocative to sell well. Two recent books, Jimmy Carter's Palestine, Peace, Not Apartheid, and John Mearsheimer and Steve Walt's The Israel Lobby in U.S. Foreign Policy, were major publishing successes. They sold hundreds of thousands of copies. They made millions of dollars for the publishers. They showed that it was possible to publish profitable works critical of the received pro-Israel version of events. Now, I have a section on books that didn't do as well. I'll skip it, including most of my own. In conclusion, in surveying the range of books on Palestine and related topics that are available to readers of English since the mid-20th century, it's clear that a significant change has taken place. Before 1948, and in the first few decades thereafter, it required great effort to find sources that were not biased in favor of the Zionist point of view. Since then, it's much more possible to find books in the social sciences and in literature and history that espouse diverse views, including some reflecting Palestinian and Arab perspectives. I began by suggesting that the realm of ideas was a major battlefield for those seeking to establish Zionism in Palestine at the expense of its indigenous inhabitants, and that success in this effort was crucial to the success of the entire Zionist project. The intellectual domain was vital. It is still too early to tell whether, as a result of this new diversity in English publications, there will be a lessening of the intellectual hegemony that the Zionist perspective achieved and maintained in the English-speaking world for most of the 20th century. And Shada is right. They've migrated to fields where they have greater chances. However, I would suggest that the growing availability of work that puts forward entirely new interpretations that were never available before means that readers of English can at last make up their own minds and are no longer exposed mainly to works which give only one tendentious and basically false interpretation of the conflict. Thank you.
Yes, I'm very impressed despite your claims. I think one conclusion we get from Rashid Khaldi's talk, apropos his comments on Exodus, is that we should produce a Hollywood movie out of one of your books. not
starring you, Salim.
not Amarat Yaqubian, I think. Our next speaker is Lex Stackenberg, and he will speak on the status of Palestinian refugees in international law. Dr. Stackenberg received his doctorate from the University of Nijmegen, I think that's the proper way of saying it, yes, and has been working for years in the field of refugee affairs, first in the Dutch Refugee Council Dutch Refugee Council in Amsterdam, and several years later with UNRWA in Damascus, Beirut, Amman, and currently he is the senior ethics officer at UNRWA. His book, The Status of Palestinian Refugees in International Law, has appeared, published by Oxford University Press, and an Arabic version of it was published by the Institute for Palestine Studies in 2003, and it's available here for you to purchase and look at. Please.
Thank you, Salim, and thanks to the Institute for Palestine Studies for the invitation. Where should I speak? Here, I have a microphone. Oh. I think, we only have 15 minutes left before the translators need to leave, and we will probably have to leave this room. So I think I will spare you a lecture on the legal status of Palestinians, but rather use it also in relation to the theme of today, to share some insights from my own sort of journey as a researcher on an aspect of the broader question of Palestine, some perspectives both as a researcher but also as a long-serving employee of UNRWA who has been in the region for now more than 2 decades. If I go back to my beginning as a refugee worker, Salim alluded to my initial years with the Dutch Refugee Council. One of the things that struck me is not so much what was written on Palestinian refugees at the time, but rather the fact that when I was trying to understand as a young lawyer why the Palestinian refugees were the only category of forced migrants that had been kept outside the general refugee regime, and for whom a special agency was created, and for whom special provisions were included in the Global Refugee Convention to sort of keep them out, and then under certain circumstances take them back in again. What I was struck by was that when I started to look for answers as to the why and with what results, there was nothing. In the early 80s, when I started working on as a refugee advocate, as a lawyer with the Dutch Refugee Council, there was absolutely nothing specifically about the plight of the Palestinian refugees. There were whole libraries, as we've heard today, on the Arab-Israeli conflict, including from a legal perspective, but nothing on the refugees. And it is this curiosity that prompted me a number of years later in the late 1980s to engage myself in research on the subject specific of the Palestinian refugees. And when I joined UNRWA, I initially worked in a program to enhance protection of Palestinians in response to the first Intifada. And when I was asked to write an article about that, and again looked in more detail, I thought, now I'm closer in the region. Maybe I now find the answers. Again I discovered, there was nothing. So that prompted me to start this doctoral research on the status of Palestinian refugees, trying to understand why the Palestinians were treated separately. Palestinian refugees were treated separately, and second, what then their status was if they were not part of the global international refugee regime. was not an easy journey at a time, as there was so little material, but I somehow succeeded in getting something meaningful together, and I gradually realized that I was sort of, undertaking research on a subject that very few people had addressed so far, and I was even more privileged when the end result seemed worthwhile enough for Oxford University Press to publish it in English, and then I owe thanks to Salim and Elias Sureik for recommending the manuscript to Oxford to the Institute for Palestine Studies that commissioned and then published an excellent Arabic translation. Now, 10 years later, more than 10 years later, I've started to work on a second edition of the book together with an excellent Palestinian legal scholar, Lina Al-Malek, and this has also been a moment to reflect, how international law has made a difference to Palestinians, and if we see the situation on the ground only deteriorating since the mid-1990s, since Oslo, and after 6 years there is still no solution to no durable solution to the plight of the Palestinians. I mean, this of course strongly prompts the question as to whether international law does matter for Palestinians, and whether it matters to write about it at all. At the same time, I strongly believe, I have very little hesitation to answer both questions in the affirmative. International law is of increasing importance to Palestinian refugees broadly in two areas. On the one hand, as long as Palestinians are forced to live as refugees, international law provides a measure of international protection that is a substitute for the protection that normally national states provide to its citizens through international institutions and other arrangements provided for under international law. At the same time, international law provides the foundations for the search for a durable solution. That is, a solution that would bring an end to the status, to Palestinian status as refugees and stateless persons. Now, I will not elaborate on these both areas, in view of the lack of time. I mean, for those interested, have a look at my book, and copies in Arabic are available outside. Has it helped? The increased realization about the significance of international law, literature on the subject made a difference. Both the first and second intifadas have quite dramatically prompted calls for improved protection of Palestinians. At the same time, Clinton's demystification of the so-called permanent status issues through the premature Camp David summit has also triggered a significant debate on permanent status issues, including the refugee issue. And so as a result, over the last 15 years, a significant body of literature on the Palestinian refugee issue has seen the light. And for someone who is, sort of working on the ground and has sort of observed the developments for now over 2 decades, I strongly feel that the literature on the legal status of Palestinians and more generally on the position of Palestinians has contributed to enhanced efforts to extend protection to Palestinians. For example, UNRWA, my own organization, that does not, unlike its sister agency UNHCR, have protection written into its original mandate, has over the past decade in particular made, I would say, dramatic instrides into mainstreaming, into incorporating protection into its work, and to a point that it is now a core aspect of core element of our work, and essentially going from the Commissioner General down to our teachers and our junior staff. Protection is an element is something that is central to every official in the organization. Also, UNHCR's involvement with Palestinians outside UNRWA's area of operations, which was a major lacuna, shameful sort of lacuna in UNHCR's work, has quite dramatically changed over the last decade. UNHCR shifted its policy on this infamous so-called exclusion clause, this Article 1D of the 51 Convention. It also quite significantly reconsidered its position on statelessness, including statelessness of Palestinians. So there has been significant changes. Also, the increased calls for accountability that we see in relation to, for example, the recent war in Gaza, but also earlier situations. Would not have been possible without the increased would not have been possible without the enhanced body of literature on sort of protection of Palestinians, relevance of human rights for Palestinians. Similarly, on the search for a durable solution to the plight of the Palestinians, the significant attention that has followed Camp David in 2000, literature by Israeli academics, work by Palestinian and Israeli think tanks, work by Palestinian and other researchers on sort of aspects of the search for a durable solution to the plight of the refugees has resulted in has first dramatically contributed to, I think, the realization of the centrality of the refugee issue amongst the permanent status issue and in the overall sort of quest for search for Middle East peace, and also has significantly contributed to sort of an emergence of an understanding of the contours of what a settlement of the refugee issue will look like. And I think there is increasingly a realization we're now increasingly at a realization that if a peace process, if a peace agreement is to deliver sustainable results, then international law has to be at the center and has to address basic rights of Palestinian of the Palestinian refugees. And I think I'll close on that note. I'm not sure whether there is much time for debate, but I'll leave that to the chair.
Thank you, Lex. I apologize for the pressure we've been putting you under. We have a few minutes left for discussion. And before I take people from the floor, I just want to suggest an inquisitory note. From Bishara's presentation, from Dr. Domani's presentation, and this is something that I also gleaned from Khalidi and Tackenberg. There's a huge volume of research, scholarship, that admittedly was done, to put it crudely, for imperial purposes. But yet, one unintended consequence of this is that we have a very rich heritage of systematic examination of the Holy Land, of Palestine, that has become our bequest, and at least it has wreaked disaster for the people of Palestine in terms of the various contending imperial strategies, whether by Ottomans, certainly by the British Mandate, and by the Zionist movement, and by the other colonial powers. But one consequence is that we have this heritage, and we sometimes tend to throw the baby with the bathwater, and it might be salutary to look at this immense corpus of studies as a way, at least it's benefiting a whole generation of scholars that are examining the Palestinian issue and the Arab-Israeli conflict in general. So it's just food for thought, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I would like to have some reaction to this comment. Okay, the floor is open. Could you please mention your name before you speak? The lady here in front.
My name is Najla Ahmadi. I teach philosophy at the Lebanese American University. I'd like to say a few things, starting from Professor Doumani's claim that there is some kind of dichotomy between academic and things on the internet and the tube and whatever. And I've been thinking about this, and it doesn't seem to me that there is such a dichotomy, because it seems PR is taking over even academia. And this takes me to the idea that it's probably psychological reasons that are always influencing everything, the politics, the writing, and everything. And if we look at the way the Arabs are projecting themselves and the way the Israelis are projecting themselves, we find some very big disparity. Because, I mean, the Israelis are always acting like they are the underdog, the victim, and even their oppression of women, they never announce it. I mean, they keep it hushed. And on the other hand, the Arabs are always acting like the one on the horse with the sword and very chauvinistic and fighting and aggressive, and also there is a lot of light on the way Arab women are oppressed. So I wonder how come they are taking these such attitudes that sell very well from a PR point of view, and we are taking attitudes that are quite negative from this point of view. May I add one thing?
No, I'm sorry. We have very few minutes left, and we need to allow other people to make intervention. Yes, please. Here's.
Hi, my name is John Hayden. I'm a master's student at AUB in political studies. Professor Doumani, I'd like to challenge your thesis on the centrality of the Holy Land as an idea or trope in the Christian imagination. I think part of cementing the narrative of a seemingly natural entente between Anglo-Protestant Christianity and Zionism is effectively to write out of history, in a sense, or to not acknowledge multiple exceptions to this general rule. This past summer, I interrogated the Canadian National Archives, and I was astonished by what I found. And admittedly, Canada is a northern garrison state of the British Commonwealth, but at the time that I was looking at it, 1945 to 1948, as a middle power that was managing two empires, bridging Anglo-American interests, it played a decisive role in the partition plan of the United Nations. So I think that the cultural discourse in Canada is a particularly interesting case study. As a brief, my preliminary findings were suggested that, in fact, the cultural landscape is extremely complex. So amongst pro-British, elite Anglo-Protestant cultural circles, you had both support for Zionism and principled dissent, or principled anti-Zionism. Amongst racist and anti-Semitic cultural discussion at this time, you had, again, both support for the Zionist project and opposition to it, suggesting a complex landscape. So a good example of this is a professor, A.E. Prince from Queen's University, who wrote in the Canadian International Affairs Journal, and also he was the editor of the United Church Bulletin, which had a circulation in 1946 of 150,000 people, So this is an Anglo-Protestant journal, and in which he published very commonsensical, principled, realist arguments in support of Palestinian self-determination, and warned against any support for the Zionist project. So I wondered if you think that this narrative then is ultimately a satisfactory explanation, or if we need to acknowledge some of these nuances and perhaps what they mean, and if you discovered similar examples of anti-Zionist polemic in your own research. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Please, Dr. Masood.
I just want to make one suggestion.
دقيقة واحدة بس.
There has been two major UN documents which have not been utilized to amplify their content and their consequences. And in the year of the book in Beirut, maybe the Institute of Palestine Studies might want to do a couple of seminars or symposium and publish these books, because if we let them go by for the next year, they would remain only documents in the UN drawers. And these two documents are the International Court of Justice on the wall, the judgment that the opinion that it has given, and on the other hand is the Goldstone